Alright, please excuse the strobe action going on. That's my blind. Okay, just closed for this. This is 1846. A little bit more light. Yeah, we're worried about weird things like that now. GMT just re-released this. It's been released before. It's a Tom Lehman game. Tom Lehman also he's done a number of games, but in the XX series he also did 2038. He has another unpublished one, but I think 1846 is definitely in the top tier of the 18XX games. It may well be the one that I would say, you know what, if you had to own one 18XX game, this might be the one to own. If you could only own one. It's not necessarily, a must-have if you have a bunch of them, although it may belong there too, because it presents some interesting and different challenges from any other XX that I've seen. It also has a fairly simplified rule set. Or stripped down, perhaps, in some cases even. The reduction of hey, this is the original board without, the stock market and stuff was on a different board, I think, before. I'm not sure. Yeah, the linear stock track simplifies some of the thinking in the game a little bit, perhaps. The fact that you can buy and sell trains right from the beginning. You can buy private companies into your corporations right from the beginning. You don't have as much going on that changes with each phase change. And I don't honestly know that there's any great reason for those, except to kind of focus you more on setting up your initial rail runs and making money in some of the other games, rather than trying to, exploit these privates for massive amounts of money or whatever. Or shifting trains, which is awfully suspicious behavior. When somebody's doing that, usually somebody else is getting screwed. Even if it's not a rape and dump situation, usually it means that the company that the person owns the most shares of is being favored over the company that they don't. Component quality on this, for the most part, excellent. I went into this in the play, and apparently this is a 46 issue, and I do remember it. The space for Chicago, the tiles that fit on that space, they don't have track coming out of them that they should. It's a little obnoxious looking. It may be a crowding of trying to get all those circles into the tile, but it personally disturbs me. Be careful. When you first get the cards, they stick together, but they're very high quality, and tobacco stain cleans off them really easily. The paper money looks like good quality. I didn't play with it this time. That's my other review. Plug these guys. These are a great boon for me. I've always looked at the poker chips, said, yeah, I don't know. I like handling paper money. It was a great deal of fun to be clicking these chips around. They were much, much easier to handle. They don't blow away. So I think for XX and probably other games, I'm going to be using those chips a fair amount of the time. I still like having cash in my game. For example, if I'm going to be going on a 2-hour walk carrying an XX game in my back or in my whatever little bag I'm carrying. You know, carrying 3-5 pounds of poker chips with me in addition is not something I want to do. But as long as I'm playing it at home or getting a ride someplace and back, I see no real problem with carrying that extra weight. The big chips always felt bad to me. They didn't work for me. And I never tried playing them solo, but playing in groups, you have these huge stacks, and they sort of dominate the game, and just they made it very difficult for me to concentrate on what was going on quite as much as the little chips do. The little chips don't take up as much space, not even as tall, and they felt perfectly reasonable to me in a way that the huge ones really didn't. The only negative to it is you'll get players who like to click their chips together, and you don't have anything to click together in 18xx. All right, getting back to this. With the components, the tracks, extra thick tiles, just like the Mayfair edition recently had. Maybe a limited amount of track in this game for how congested the board gets. You kind of wish you had more pieces, but part of the game is blocking people out by stealing the track. And yeah. You can say what you like about that. That just works out as an important part of the game when there's limited track, and I think it's an important part of XX. If you allowed for unlimited track, or connections the way the 18OE games have, and 18EU, the more flexible connection type spaces, you end up with people building exactly the routes they want. Well, with limited track, you can't get the routes you want most of the time. Somebody is able to block you out. What else? Company charters are good. The board, good quality. It feels like the hexes are a little larger than any other game, but that may just be my confusion after playing 18OE with its very tiny hexes. Because I'm thinking, I made a Settlers of Catan game off of my blank 18xx hex, at least as a pattern for size. I may have cut them out of something else, and they couldn't have been much smaller than this. So, whatever. It feels like the board takes up more space than it did in the original version or whatever. I'm trying to remember about the rules. They're clearly nicely presented. I remember vaguely having a little bit of difficulty. Yeah, I always have difficulty with rules, but I mean, I remember finding a couple of things where maybe they weren't absolutely as clear as they could be, or I had to. I don't recall what, but overall they're clear enough, and a lot of support materials inside of them. Everything that we've sort of come to expect in the later XX games in terms of presenting them. In terms of play, why is this one particularly interesting? Why does it get into that top tier? Maybe the best game, maybe the best XX out there. Well, other than the simplicity, and it's not ridiculously simplistic. It's on about the level of 1830, but it's not adding all these kind of complicated, financial instruments that you have in like 1841. But it does have a little bit. It has the capability of the companies to buy their own shares back, but it's all handled very simply and in a very clean manner. It's not, like the re-releases in 1870 or anything like that. Nah, they're just where they were at the beginning of the game. The company buys them back. You can buy them back from the company. The company, though, has this one special ability, which is releasing those shares. And that is actually key to the understanding of this game. Because it's partial capitalization, which means you can start it with very little money. You don't need to find any investors. You can release not 50%, but equal to the number of players held shares into the bank pool from the company and just get cash for them. You don't need help running your company. So you don't need to make sure you have enough cash to start a company. I mean, you do to a certain level, but you can float it on 20%. If you can hold it, whatever percentage you need to hold it, that's what you need. And then you're left with this really kind of interesting question as you play, which is you can eventually buy off 50% of it and dump the other 50% into the bank pool from the company treasury. And then you're fully capitalized, right? You know, it gives you a lot of control over the timing of your money and of what trains you're going to want to buy, how quickly you want to pace that and everything. It devalues, though, the second tier of corporations. So in 1830, the first tier of corporations, some of them are going to do really, really big money, but for the most part, you can get away pretty well as an investor. The second tier of corporations in this game have lost out because of the double track lays on a lot of the development of the board. The board develops very quickly for those first companies, and they're able to make some pretty decent runs, but not, I don't feel like this is a game where you pound out that early money really well, because you control your capital so much that you're not trying to, oh, look, I made 30 around. Do you want to buy some of this? You need to own some of this. You don't need that kind of salesmanship in it. So you can work to try to develop your corporations a little bit more to your own pace. You don't have to worry about trying to get someone else to invest into your companies. Early money is also very important in most of the XX games, because hey, once I have enough early money, I can start another company, and then that gives you all kind of different advantages. I don't think you have as many different advantages from that second tier. It feels like there's less capability, and I may be mistaken on this, but there's less capability, less incentive to juggle your trains, to try to do things like that, probably because you have so much control of your own money. It's just not a situation like, and in the full capitalization games, and most of them mid-game and late game are full capitalization, you end up putting down half the money and getting all of it. Here, if you do that, you still get all of the money for half the money, because you can release the 50%. The other thing, though, is the release timing. The longer you wait to release, the more capital that you obtain for your company, because the stock value goes up. It doesn't have a par value on it. So you have these really neat little decisions to make, and you get to make them very early. and try to implement them. You can take a very strategic view of this, or you can try to play it opportunistically, and I think probably that's usually a bad choice in this. However, you don't want to be rigid in your strategic thinking, because whatever, like any other XX game, what everybody else is doing is going to impact your own decisions pretty significantly. So if you just, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy two trains, and then, I'm going to release my stock once it hits 165, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. Well, you may need to switch that around, and if you can't do that, you'll find yourself perhaps locked into a situation that doesn't work for you. All of that together provides an XX that I haven't seen this kind of pace and this kind of control that everybody kind of has over their own company and over their own future, as it were. Of course, the other players are having an influence, though, because, they affect that pace that the trains come out. And that's where you're most pushed by them. The game has a lot of track blocking going on. It has a lot of token cutting possibilities. And can get pretty nasty as a little brutal knife fight in there. You can see the game that I played of it. The board just got so congested. Almost all the track was out. Almost all the spaces were filled. Many of them, like more than half perhaps, were no longer yellow. Just a lot of attempts to try to break through, to cut people's routes, and then to try to wiggle around and get them. It has the east-west advantage, so you have a territorial goal to the game, which I always kind of like, because without that, it just favors whoever has the richest little cluster of cities. A couple funky things like your train choice. You can choose to either get a flat train or a train that goes a little further but can skip a couple cities. Until you hit the final trains. The final trains, the flat train's the cheap price, and the skip train is just bigger in all ways. So I found the price difference between those two not to be too significant, except if you were hitting it on the, geez, I really got to get this now, or even a forced train purchase. Bankruptcy not knocking the game on its ass. That means the game, you won't get a surprise win because of, oh look, he didn't get to develop his, full capacity of train route and run his train for those high runs he was planning, and my early money made the win. You don't get that kind of opportunity in this game. Somebody gets knocked out, yeah, too bad, they're knocked out. You can have companies sitting in the bank pool, and they'll run themselves in a receivership type situation. This only happens because of bankruptcy, but it's again a nice. It's implemented cleanly. It seems fairly simple when you're playing it, but it adds some interesting little aspects to the game. The fact that if you can try to force a bankruptcy while you have priority deal, maybe you get another company, Just some really weird subtleties that probably come out over a lot of different plays. I've only played it, this is my third time. How does it hold up as an introductory game? Well, obviously it's got to hold up pretty well if I can say, hey, if there's only one 18xx game, this may be the one you want. If you could only buy one. And that's true. Under that condition, if you think you're going to be a casual XX player, you want to try playing them, and you don't really want to get too hooked on it, but something looks really cool, and you don't think, I don't want to explore every little way that it works. I want one good competitive XX game. I'd say this is among the very best that I've seen. See, part of the problem is the things that are weird to me about it and that throw me for a loop are part of what makes me say this is so great. But if this is the one you train on, then those things aren't going to seem so weird to you. And but it looks pretty clear to me that there's as much depth to this as there is in 1830. It's got the added advantages. It's a little shorter than an 1830. Well, it's, I think, significantly shorter than 1830, but whatever. It's shorter than 1830, but not shorter than the 1830 short game. And it's capable of holding smaller numbers of players well. I would have never thought a 3-player game of 18XX would be much fun. I have played this 3-player by design, and then this last game ended up 3-player because 2 people went bankrupt. That's how little I get this one. However, the lessons you learn from this XX may not be terribly effective for you when you start translating them over to the other games. Some of them are, but you're going to be a lot more constrained in terms of how you raise capital in most of the other XX games. And you're going to be pushed into positions that you may face the same kind of problem I did. I went bankrupt because, hey, you gave me all this capability to like play with money and stuff. Okay, now I'm gambling on if I get a feeder line, I can make this all work. Yeah, no, that has never worked for me in this. I'm sure there are ways to make a feeder line work in it, but it just hasn't happened for me. I think it's a lot more difficult to have to gain a significant advantage off of that, because the significant advantage that you gain in 1830 is in part a way to get around some of the difficulty of obtaining capital. But if everybody can get capital pretty easily, then they can push the trains out real fast, and that's part of why this is a quicker game. Because it's got a fairly large bank, the runs aren't ridiculously big, but there's just something about it that seems short. It also scales. It's set up. It's designed to scale to maintain the game's competitive qualities when you drop the players. So you take out corporations, you take out private companies. There's something that I don't know if I like too much about this. So this gets rid of the private company auction or packet. Instead, it gives you a fairly large pile of cards of privates, and you get to just pick one. Just one. And you could end up not getting any chance to get the ones that you want. Now, this is usually not the case in an XX. Most of them give you an auction. 1835 is the exception. You don't get much choice there. But usually you're handed an auction option. And all the stuff you might want is usually later in the auction. 1830, clearly not the case. The D&H is kind of cool, and it comes, I think, third. It's quite possible that could fall before you get a chance at it. But here, you're handed, maybe half the deck of private companies and such not. But there's some dummies in there, some things that are just blanks, and you could well end up with a bunch of blank cards and a couple of companies that you didn't really terribly want. The privates are probably worth getting in this. You don't have the same kind of selling power that you do in an 1830. And I've kind of translated, wow, why is this not... I still haven't gotten to the why I'm not sure this is that great as a learning game. Well, the reason I'm not sure is because what you do learn from it won't translate that well. And I did say that, so I don't know. I thought I was going somewhere else with it. But anyway, the way the minor packet is dealt out, etc., I just feel like there's too much capacity for luck in that. And one of the things that 18XX... So 18XX always had a couple of key things that this game violates. One is generally there's no lock except for where you're sitting. 1853 is the exception to that with the expansion. But, well, there's a lot of luck in this one. It happens right at the beginning of the game, and it can really influence your game. Other players are kind of like luck, though. When you sit down at a table with 6 people, and a couple of them have very different strategies than you do, or maybe don't know the game that well, they may take some actions that you just don't count on at all, and they could cause you some real problems. So I don't know how different that is from being handed a pile of cards. The other thing that this kind of changes is 18xx usually gives you, hey, here's the starting money, split it up among the number of players, and then try to run all these companies as best you can. And this changes that and says, you know what, we'll play with less players, therefore we'll have less of the game available, less board in this, less of the potential game state available, in the sense that you remove some companies, you remove some corporations, you remove some money from the bank, so that the game plays very similarly across the number of players. Now, of course, if somebody goes bankrupt, that changes things, and you do get into a situation where people can have more control. Things I kind of don't like, one that definitely bothers me is this is less, even though there's no rules to prevent it, this is less of a rape and dump companies type game than 1830. And it has to do with the pace at the beginning of the game. So that's one of the things, you know, as a new player, you're going to maybe come in, play this a few times, going, yeah, I'm ready for 30, you know. Well, most of the games that I like the most follow the 30 model, which means you have to run a company really, really hard and stretch it to its limits in the early part of the game. And then you have, you know, a pile of cash. Your company is not necessarily set up well for the late game at all. And maybe this is capable of it, I just don't know. And, you know, well, I don't really need this company that much anymore. I got my money out of it. If you happen to be investing and I can give it to you, that'd be fine. If you leave me with it, well, that's fine too. We'll leave a bunch of shares in the bank pool where they produce money. Well, here the bank pool doesn't produce money. The company needs money to make money. It needs money in the form of those shares. So, at the beginning of the game, when you first buy the shares, when you first buy and float the company and put a little bit of cash in there, it's got some cash, could buy some trains, and it's got the capacity of potential money. And I guess the question is, do you release, you know, your shares initially and try to run real hard and make big money there, and then maybe that does become a rapeable company? Or, you know, I think the guys who won in my game followed more of a, yeah, you know, we're in this for the long haul, let's get the stock value up, and let's make sure the companies survive a little better. I don't know which one I favor in terms of, you know, which is more interesting game, but it does give this a little bit more, a little bit less chaos, a little bit less threat at the beginning of the game. And it means also that, you know, when you transfer from this to the 1830 or most of the others, you might well find yourself just kind of looking and saying, wow, I don't know what just happened to me, but now I own, you know, now I own the B&O. There's no trains on it, no money, no hopes. And I'm going to have to pay $450 out of pocket or $300 out of pocket for a non-permanent train, say. And, wow, I just don't know what's going to happen here. I mean, I felt like I was doing fine. Well, I think that's a lot less likely in this. I think it's a lot more likely that people will run their companies in a more adult fashion. Which, and part of that is because there are a couple, the later starting companies are likely to be the ones that are in kind of the corners of the map that don't have a really good starting. They don't really get to lay out their track very early, or they don't get to lay out track and make good money right away. So they don't look attractive right at the beginning, and then they never really look attractive, and they have a hard time getting established on the board terribly well. Now, we saw by the end of the game, sure, they're able to do whatever the hell, once they link up, but it takes more time for them to link up because they're more isolated than the companies that get initially started. There might be exceptions, but overall, yeah, I think finding valuable new companies in this game is going to be harder than it is certainly in 1830. Which leads me to I still think the best starter for somebody who wants to get into 18XX and thinks they might get into it heavily is 1830 and play the short game. The short game is brutal, fast, etc. But it still shows you the things that are more common to the series. However, the fact that this one can floor me on, not terribly complicated rules. I'm not looking at, look at all these, how these mergers work and all this. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. This does it on a much simpler level, and it does. 1856 had been, and probably still, it's hard to tell, but 1856 was always my favorite out of the older ones because it had this weird shaken up pace that was just very different from 1830 because of the easy money that was available through the loans. This also has a shaken up pace. It could be that 30 is just as 30 will be just as different from the other perspective, but it doesn't excite me as much because I'm more used to it. So like 56 and 46 appeal to me because they have this really kind of mind-shattering pace. I think 60 had something similar. God, I'm gonna have to go back and play both 60 and 61. I don't know. But I remember I played this and 60 about the same time for the first time, and I remember both of them feeling similar to me. The fact that this thing is available fairly easily, you don't have to go through deep thought and wait 5 years or whatever to get a copy, and pay an arm and a leg. It's a reasonably priced, game. I'd say, hey, go for this if you have any interest in the 18XXs. I don't think you can go wrong with this one. I don't think you can go wrong with 1830 either, but like I said, this might be the one you want a copy of, mainly because of the time. It's a little shorter, and the player count. It can hold 3 comfortably. I honestly have generally not liked playing 1830 in less than 5. Now, I think with a really competitive group who all know the game really well, a 4-player game works fine. 3-player does not. 3-player, there's just too much control. And that's the problem with the 4-player with the kind of players that I often, had. Usually there was somebody who wasn't hugely an XX fan. This, though, holds up, and we played it 3-player with a new player, and I don't feel like, he didn't have a chance, but I don't feel like either one of the more experienced players had a domination of the game in any sense of the word. All right, let's send this up.